And we are live now.
All right, good afternoon and welcome to Harris County Democratic Lawyers CLE on sustainability. We have a great panel for you today. Have a few announcements for you. Mike had a conflict, so he asked me to fill in. First of all, we've got another CLE in 2 days, a big one with John Dean on American authoritarianism, and Barbara Radnowski will be moderating and interviewing John Dean for that, and we're expecting a really big crowd. It'll be really interesting. He's got a new book out, and he's been on the news a lot lately. We also have a CLE on October 3rd, and I will have to get back with you on what that one is because I don't have that in my notes. September 24th, we will be presenting a CLE with Natalia Corneo, and I think we have Sheriff Gonzalez lined up for that, and Brian Middleton, the DA from Fort Worth, and there may be another panel member on that one as well. October 8th, we're doing a CLE on the eviction crisis, and we're putting together a great panel with experts on it and ideas, thinking outside of the box on how structurally can we fix this problem, because it's clearly not going to work, and we're clearly facing a crisis that needs immediate attention. There's a lot of lawyers who have been volunteering. We'll be seeking more volunteers for that effort to help people facing this crisis. And October 29th, we are going to do the Clarence Darrow Award presentation. It'll be set up as a CLE as well. We'll be presenting it to Gary Bledsoe, the longtime director of the National NAACP. We're gonna have a very small ceremony on the patio at the Hotel Zaza in Houston, and it will be live streamed and it will be recorded, and so everybody can participate. And I also wanted to announce that today is National Poll Worker Day, and the Texas Party and Harris County are doing a very big effort to get as many poll workers as we can. In Harris County, you should contact Nicole, and I'll put her information in the chat room. On the state level, if you're outside of Harris County and you want to volunteer in this effort, they desperately need as many people as they can. We're trying to have the biggest voter protection effort ever in the state, and you can contact Rose Clouston with the state party on that, and we'll put that in the chat room as well if you want to volunteer in those efforts. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mike Collier. Many of you know, most of you know Mike. He ran for lieutenant governor a few years ago, and he is now a senior advisor to the Biden campaign. And I'm going to turn it over to Mike to introduce our great panel today, and we'll take it from there. Thank you, Mike.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen, and hello, everyone. I wish we could be together. I think we all feel that way. Our life in Zoom, at least we can get together in a manner of speaking and to talk about this very important subject. In a minute, I'm going to introduce the panelists. The format for the hour that we have in mind is that in a minute, I'll ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and to share with us their, from a high level perspective, when they think sustainability, and particularly when they think about the Gulf Coast, what does that mean to them? And then we'll use that as a jumping off point to dive into some policy ideas, principles. What can we do as Democrats? What do we intend to do? What do we aspire to do to address these issues? As this progresses, if you have questions, if you would kindly put them in the chat functionality. And my good friend Jon Powell, whom you know, is going to keep up with the questions that roll in. And when we get towards the end of the hour, we'll turn it over to Jon, and so he'll try to help us be responsive to your questions. I can tell you, so what I'd like to say to launch it is, you know, Democrats are action-oriented and Republicans are not action-oriented. And one of the actions that I'm very concerned about is coastal storm protection and Laura. If Laura had only been, what, 90 miles west, it could have been that black swan event that we're all so frightened about in this part of the state. If a category 3, 4, or 5 were to hit directly on the ship channel, something like 80 million barrels of chemicals could be released. Now, if that were to happen, that would destroy our environment all the way down to Galveston for the rest of our lifetime. And we saw with Laura how close that is. And when I talk about action-oriented, we've been talking about this since Ike. And Ike hit 10 years ago. And there's no action. So I share the view that so many folks along the Gulf Coast share, is that coastal storm protection is a huge issue. We can't just talk about it. We've got to act. And I hope that as panelists, we get into that. And we also ought to talk about the financing, because that always seems to be where things break down. There's a lot more to sustainability than just that, obviously. We have an entire coast to be concerned about. We have too much water, and we have flooding, and we've got all sorts of issues if we want to maintain the quality of our life here in coastal Texas and also preserve our lives. So this is a very, very, very important topic. And I couldn't be happier to be here. I'll make only one pitch for Vice President Biden. He's on it. He understands that we must invest in infrastructure and coastal storm protection, the other things we're going to talk about. We will have access to him. And of course, we all have a problem with money. Where's the money going to come from? But we've got the right person driving the ship, if you'll pardon the expression. But that's enough for me. Let's talk about our panelists. So what I'd like to do, we have wonderful candidates, and this is really exciting to be a part of this. I'm just going to go in no particular order, candidate by candidate. And I will not attempt to introduce you. Would ask you to introduce yourself, say a few words, and then what does coastal storm protection, sustainability mean to you, and then we'll get into it. So why don't we start with Mr. Sri Kulkarni, running for Congressional District 22. Hello, Sri. How are you today?
There. All right. Hi, Mike. I'm very glad to be here. I wish I could be with you in person, as you mentioned already, but hopefully at some point soon we'll be able to do these. I am the Democratic nominee for U.S. Congress in Texas 22. I was your Democratic nominee in 2018 when we got within 4.9 points of winning this seat. And now we are the #3 red to blue race in the entire country. Very proud of that here in Texas 22. I was a Foreign Service officer for over 14 years, and then I resigned in 2017 to come back home and run for Congress after seeing the kind of changes in our government and the threats to our basic values that we continue to experience every single day, especially to rule of law. In terms of flooding, I think all of us have our own flood stories or weather-related stories. I mean, I have lost my car to flooding in the Houston area. My brother and sister almost lost their life when floodwater started pouring in through their windows and they had to jump out. We've been stranded in the middle of the city as floodwaters start rising all around us. And I visited so many families, especially after Harvey, that even a year later, we're still not rebuilt. And my general attitude is, one, we need to make sure that we're providing relief to people as quickly as possible and not making it hard for residents to rebuild their lives after these natural disasters. Two is that we need to put in place protections, whether it's the Ike Dike out on the coast or whether it's more dynamic systems of canals and pumping that help us deal with flooding so that we don't have the same situation that we had with the Adix and Barker reservoirs that overflowed. And then obviously it's a bigger topic than today, but dealing with the effects of climate change, because when we see 500-year flood event after 500-year flood event, we know that this is not normal. This doesn't mean that we're safe for another 1,500 years. It means that we've got to do something to mitigate these effects. So that's my broad overview of the way that I approach flooding, storm surge, and living in the coastal plain.
Thank you, Sri. It's always great campaigning with you, by the way. I wish I were on the ballot. I'm not on the ballot. I'm on the fight, but I'm just delighted that you decided to run again.
You know, there's more elections coming up in the future, so.
We'll worry about that after we get rid of Trump. Next, let's hear from Adrienne Bell, Congressional District number 14. Hello, Adrienne.
Good evening. Hello. Good afternoon to everyone. I am Adrienne Bell. I am the Democratic nominee for Congress here in Texas 14. Texas 14 has 5 ports, which are the most ports of any congressional district in the country. And when you look at the top 5 ports, we have Beaumont, Freeport, Texas City, and also Port Arthur. Each one of those were in the line for Hurricane Laura. Hurricane Laura was a wake-up call, or should be a wake-up call, that we've got to have coastal protection. This is a national economic issue, and it needs to be treated as such, that we don't lose lives, we don't lose property, and that we are prepared. Since Hurricane Ike, nothing has been happening, and our federal government needs to move. But we need representatives that are going to come together, that are going to provide funding and make sure that this is taken care of. I will be committed, and I am committed, to making sure that we have the funding necessary so that we can provide coastal protection for our residents and for all of our friends. And also, during a pandemic, we have so many people that had to evacuate, like from Port Arthur. People don't just have money in the bank to just jump up and evacuate. We've got to provide for our residents, and we need to provide for them quickly. But I definitely support a coastal spine protection, and I definitely support us taking care of that now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrienne. I also enjoy campaigning with you. We did that quite a lot together. And so thanks again for running. I'm now going to talk to my old college friend, Susan Criss. We actually knew each other back in the day. Should I mention what year? No, but we are the same age, same class, and found ourselves on the UT campus at the same time in a different era. Susan, thank you for joining us. Senate District 11. Candidate for Senate District 11.
Thank you, Mike. I was born on Galveston Island, and my grandparents were born on Galveston, and my parents were born. So I grew up hearing the stories about the 1900 storm. And then at one point there was a 100-year anniversary, and I really learned a lot about storms during that time. When I was 6 months old, my mother evacuated because of Hurricane Carla. So I spent my life either trying to decide, do you evacuate or do you hunker down? And we all knew that it was a matter of time before the next 1900 storm of the century, happened. We all just hoped it would not happen in our lifetime. And you know, you either hunker down or you leave, and you hope that it goes somewhere else. And that's pretty much the way hurricane preparation went. Well, everyone says now, Laura is the wake-up call, but no, Ike was the wake-up call, as Adrienne said. Ike was the wake-up call. That was our storm of the century. And we thought it would be the last storm of the century in our lifetime until a century later. But they're coming meaner and they're coming harder. And the flooding gets worse and worse. And you don't even have to have a major hurricane for there to be flooding now. We have to do a better job. So my home was destroyed. The interior of my home was destroyed. I was out of it for 18 months during Ike. I was a district court judge then. And one of the things, in addition to recovering personally, we had to figure out how to have a major institution. The courthouse had to recover. Institutions had to recover. One of the things that I learned from the judges who recovered from Katrina was the first thing that needs to happen is your schools need to be in place. And as a judge, I learned your post office needs to be in place. There are so much that our post office and our schools were destroyed. So these kids had to go elsewhere. For our post office, all of our post offices on the island were destroyed. We had to go to an outlet mall and spend a couple hours a day getting our mail. So I really appreciate what it is like to not have a post office. And shockingly enough, right now, we have to worry about having those institutions to begin with, not just in the recovery. A lot of times we prepare for the hurricane, but we don't prepare for the aftermath. And that's where we have to get better. We have to get so much better. We have to figure out how to mitigate and prevent the flooding. And there's a lot of studies and there's a lot of things that we know. But like Adrienne said, we have to start doing them. There were things that were talked about after Ike. Not a step, nothing has improved. And it's going to get worse now because we have the, like Adrienne said, because we have the other crises, the pandemics. People can't even afford to escape. It just accentuates the problem, and we have got to get better. As a judge, you know, we got the courthouse going back as quickly as possible. After we did that, I presided over all of the Hurricane Ike damage cases, and you got to see the devastation. There was a lot of problems with TWIA, and there were a lot of problems with my opponent was actually tried to stop some of the mediations from going forward and tried to undo some of them because he saw plaintiffs' lawyers making money from hurricane cases. And one of the ones who was making the most was buying one-page ads against Governor Perry at the time. And so because, those plaintiff lawyers with all that money are going to be using it to run against us, there were problems with people getting their cases resolved because of interference with that. That's got to stop. We have to have a better plan to move forward. And the other thing that I think is most important, and it's not just in hurricane damage, it's in any disaster. There are roles for the state government and there's roles for local government. And there's roles for rules to be put aside during an emergency to get us through the emergency. And we are now just doing it hot. You know what? Today we're going to let the local. Tomorrow we're going to let the state. And when we get some pushback from our powerful partisan people, we're going to switch it around. Oh, no. Now we're going to say local, you can't do it. Tomorrow we're going to say local, you can do it. We need to have those things set in a much better organized way so that everybody knows this is your responsibility, this is your responsibility, and this is where we work together.
Thank you very much, Susan. I'm now going to pivot over to Mr. Lewis, Rashad Lewis. So glad that you're running. He and I met in Jasper back 18 months ago or so. He said, I'm thinking about running. Should I do it? Should I do it? Absolutely, you should do it. Now, you also got hit by a storm. So thank you. Thank you so much for running. Young man, you have many campaigns ahead of you, which I think is wonderful. You also evacuated Laura. So anyway, please introduce yourself and tell us your story, Rashad.
Well, first, it's an honor to be here with everyone. Yes, my name is Rashad Lewis, and I'm running for Congressional District of 36. And yes, we was just hit through Hurricane Laura. I did not evacuate. I stayed here because I knew that a lot of people could not afford to evacuate. So as a servant in my community, my job was to be here for the aftermath. And we're just going through that. We just received lights today. And so there's a lot of people who are coming back home, finding out that their homes and trailers are damaged, but we do not have any relief. We're not even classified as a disaster area at this current moment. So I truly understand firsthand what it's like to not have the aid that you need during this actual event. Plus, we're in the middle of a pandemic too. So you have a lot of people who are coming back without the protection of the pandemic and coming back home to a home that's basically not there anymore. So I do understand exactly what everyone is saying. And I know that we need this in our area because this is not going to be the last time we are affected by anything like this. So I'm honored and blessed to be on this panel to hear what everyone has to say today.
Thank you very much, Rashad. And then Alix, my friend Kayla Alix, running for the House District 129. Please introduce yourself, Kayla.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kayla Alix, and as Mike mentioned, I am running for Texas House District 129. And this topic is very near and dear to my heart. When my husband and I got stationed back in 2008 to the area, and we bought our house literally August 6, 2008. We hadn't even moved in all of our items in the house. We moved them in the garage because we were still transitioning back from San Antonio. And so I came back 2 weeks prior to my husband, and that was about 2 weeks before Hurricane Ike. It was just myself, my kids. Our kids were young at the time. And we sustained 90% of our insurance payout damage to our home. We were able to evacuate and go to San Antonio because we still had our living quarters there. But when we came home, literally lost everything. Pictures, when I tell you everything. And so shortly after that, we started repairing our home, and we literally, it took us years to repair. So we literally got our home up and running functionally, and then here's Harvey, and we took on a little water there and some damage there. And so these are real stories, and a lot of our veterans are fighting. Still, we my nonprofit, CHAMP, we help veterans and their families. We helped a World War II veteran out in Bay Cliff restore his house from top to bottom. It was completely damaged, and that was from Harvey. There are many veterans who are still struggling and still repairing their homes. So one of the things that is close to me is, since I am a STEM professional, science, technology, engineering, and math is very near and dear to my heart. And I sat on several panels with the utility company that I work for. It's my day job, and with the city of Houston, and we talked about smart cities. I know in Europe and in Saudi Arabia and also in Africa, they have some smart cities that is beneficial in help mitigating some of the floods that they seen or some of the environmental damages that they experienced. And so with that being said, there's been some research, and I believe that integrating all of our utilities, that includes water, waste, engineering, transport, information, communication, and technology, if we integrate that and allow some of the petroleum businesses, the utility businesses, to help distribute some of the costs and help with the costs along with our city and state, we can come up with a plan to have a smart city. LA currently is one of the host city of smart cities, and I believe Dallas is doing one of their small communities, is doing a trial run. And IBM is kind of leading the charge in that. And so there's a small device that you can put on some of our light poles that we see, our street lights that we have, as well as some of our communication devices. And what it does is it picks up, and it's programmed to pick up any issues with traffic or water, flooding, coming storms, anything that we ask or have it programmed to do is able to do that and bring back real-time analytics, and that can bring that back to the commissioner's court, as well as some of the other local municipals, as well as our state and federal. And so we can have that real-time data and use that data to project any future storms, to help project any mishaps that could happen with the ship channel or at Galveston. So those are some of the things that I am willing to champion, those causes that will really help our state.
Terrific. Well, Kayla, thank you very much. I appreciate that. We have another panelist, Jon Powell, but Jon, if you'll indulge me, Jon's going to help me with the Q&A in the end. But before I come to you, Jon, to introduce yourself and get your point of view, I want to ask Adrienne a question. Adrienne has a commitment and a hard stop, and so in 4 minutes she has to go. And but before she goes, I wanted just to ask her, you'd mentioned funding. You got 5 ports in your district, and
Yes.
Funding is the issue. What's the history? I mean, we've been sitting around talking about funding forever. What's the history of this stalemate that we have on funding, and where do you think the problem lies, and what thoughts do you have in terms of actually getting there in terms of funding the things that we need to do?
One thing I've discovered about America is that we pay for whatever it is that we want. And if we want coastal funding, coastal protection, we will pay for it. We don't have to figure out, do we have the money for it? We don't have the luxury of not funding it. It was said that if Galveston was hit by a 25-foot storm surge, it would be a $100 billion hurricane. $100 billion. Well, Hurricane Laura was predicted to be a 32-foot surge along Port Arthur. Now, just think of how much money that would have cost, how many lives that we would have lost had that happened. I just firmly believe that we have the money to take care of this, but we've got to have people in place that are going to push this. We've got in this district 2 strategic military ports. That's in Beaumont and that's in Port Arthur. We fuel the nation with energy. And so the losses that would happen here would be affected and felt all across America. When we had the storm Harvey hit in Port Arthur, Mativa was taken offline for several days. Gas shortages started happening, and people were like, where is this coming from? It's from a little town called Port Arthur. And so we are the places that are really affecting America. And we just got to push for the funding. When we work with federal, we work with state, and we make sure that this happens, because this is important as a security issue, and it's important as an economic issue. And we've got to continue getting that point across. It's an economic issue, and it affects everyone in America, just not just those of us who live around the Gulf Coast area. And I think that argument has not been strong enough. It's like it affects, Texas 22, Texas 36, Texas 14. No, it affects Missouri 1, it affects Florida 14, it affects everybody. And we've got to make it a wholehearted effort to make sure that we have coastal protection in the Gulf Coast area.
Well, I have no doubt that you'll fight for us and fight for that.
Definitely.
Well, Adrienne, thank you so much for joining us. If you have to exit stage left because of other commitments, let the record reflect that we took good care of you, and thank you so much for coming out. Before we leave the topic of finance, before I get to you, Jon, we have two other candidates for the United States Congress.
Can I say one thing, Mike?
Yeah.
If there's
Yeah,
any question for me, Jon, that I need to answer or need to be asked, would you please just email that to me, and I'll respond, because this is an important issue, and I really want the input, because we ought to make a difference in this area. So if you just shoot me an email, if anyone has a question for me, I will respond.
I will do that, Adrienne.
Okay, thank y'all.
Thank you,
so
Adrienne.
much. Bye-bye.
All right, so two other candidates for the United States Congress, Mr. Lewis and Mr. Kulkarni. We heard Adrienne talk about, in my words, where there's a will, there's a way. How do you feel about the will of your constituents to put money into coastal storm protection? Do you think they're there?
I can speak for Texas 22. Absolutely. I mean, we've seen the damage, especially of flooding. Harvey obviously hit our district very hard. But whether we're talking about the reservoirs, or whether we're talking about the Brazos River, for example, we have about 80 to 90,000 people who live along the 9 miles of the Brazos River that goes through the Sugar Land area. There's about $1 billion in infrastructure there, and $15 billion worth of property along the banks there. And we have about 40 levees that need to be reinforced there. So the amount of damage that can be done to our communities is incalculable. And I think there's a strong support, as Adrienne said. The things that we prioritize with our funding show the values that we hold as a society. And so if we care about protecting our communities from this kind of damage, then we're willing to prioritize that. And so I just put a link on the side there for our flooding platform, which our opponent does not have. He doesn't have much on his platform to begin with, but specifically on flooding, if you all want to take a look down at the link, and we have a whole series of things that we want to do to make sure that we're protected from future major disasters like this.
Thank you. Rashad, when you travel around and campaign, how do you think people feel about it?
I totally agree with 36. The people of 36 would love to be a part of that, because no matter what hurricane comes, we are affected because we're so close to Louisiana that every time a hurricane comes, there is a part of 36 that is going to be damaged, and it's going to be people without. So I really strongly believe that the people of 36 is on board, even with Babin, my opponent, voting against disaster relief a couple of years ago, like understanding that no matter what part of 36 comes, there is going to be a part that will be hit by a hurricane no matter what.
Yeah, thank you. Jon, I'm going to come to you in a minute, don't worry. But I want to just say to everybody, go on chat if you have questions that you want to have answered. Before too long, I'm going to turn the controls over to Jon. Jon, that's when I'll give you a chance, if that's all right, to introduce yourself and say a few words. I want to cut over real quick to Susan. So when I was running for lieutenant governor, I don't want to mention his name, a very prominent BOI, person born on the island, asked me to come down and visit him, and we went to the top floor of the tallest building. So I got a tour of Galveston from that perspective, and he showed me the different quarters. He also showed me the damage that was still done and not recovering, trees that are gone from Hurricane Ike and so forth. And he's the one who told me about what would happen if a Cat 5 hit the ship channel and released those chemicals. And he said, Mike, this island would be gone and potentially uninhabitable if 80 million barrels of toxins found their way to Galveston. So, Susan, you would think that everybody on that island would vote Democrat if they knew that peril, and if they knew that we were the party that acts on these things. How are people's moods? Do they understand? Do folks on Galveston Island recognize the importance of coastal storm protection?
I think the people in Galveston do. I really do. I think a lot of people do here. You know, during Laura, I evacuated, and I had a very good friend from New York City who's a writer, and I met her from the Dist case, and she was a very, very prominent writer, but she was new to Louisiana. She had just moved here. And I spent so much time trying to convince her how much more danger it was than she thought. But I think the people who've been through the storm, if you've been through a major storm here, you do get it. So people in Galveston do know. But what you said about the refineries and our energy, this is the nation's most significant energy center. And like Adrienne said, if we get hit, if our refineries get hit, it's not just our area, it's not just Texas, it's the nation, and it's our military. And so we've got hundreds of refineries and chemical plants, hundreds. They're not in great shape to begin with. As someone who handled the BP explosion cases, and we saw what little money was put into maintenance, it was pretty scary. There are at risk of explosions. There are explosions. There are leaks, there are spills, and a lot of that doesn't get covered. But it could always be so much worse. And as someone who recovered from Ike, and I had storm water in my garage, I learned one of the horrible things is when the storm water comes to your house and your garage, it's gone through everybody else's house and garage. And it's got their motor oil and their grease and all the and dead animals and just all the horrible, horrible stuff, which is why it's so dangerous. But it's also going through the chemical plants and the refineries. And there's spills and there's things that are gathering that are toxic. There are chemicals that are dangerous, carcinogens. And we don't realize that storm water, that it doesn't get separated. Oh, here's the refinery water, here's the residential water. It all gets mixed up and it's all dangerous. But as I learned from Jim Blackburn at this very club meeting when he spoke, if one of those refinery containers breaks, it's over. It's major. It's just terribly frightening how that is. But they're not maintaining. You know, and BP, they didn't maintain them because it's cheaper to not maintain it. That's crazy. But that's also the reality that that's what people don't know.
Well, I accept your proposition with sadness and fear, to be honest with you, Susan. I know how this operation is. You're running for the state Senate. The person you're running against probably takes big campaign donations. Kayla, I'm coming to you in a second. And we know how campaign finance works. And we know that on the other side of the aisle, the large corporate special interests write big checks and they get elected. And that's what we're fighting against. It's the fight. I'm on the right side of this fight. You're on the right side of this fight. And we're not too far away from winning. And I suspect this may be the time, but we've got to have people making these decisions and not the big corporations. It's just not a good answer. Correct. Kayla, I want to come back to you. You said something very, very intriguing, and I hadn't heard about this yet. I want to hear a little bit more, and it's about this integration. And you mentioned IBM and sort of an industrial technological solution to the water management and flooding problem we've got where you live. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, so we are in the technology age, and for whatever reason, we're not utilizing that technology to the best efforts. I believe that technology can assist with the mitigation of flooding. And so the utility company that I work for, we partnered with IBM and we created a smart city solution for that utility company to help with detecting gas leaks, detecting high traffic volume in downtown Houston. And so there is a small device that you can put on either your light posts that you see outside your home in your subdivision, or your street lights that you stop at every day while traveling. There's a small device that you won't be able to detect it from your eye from a distance, but if you pull up to your street light and you kind of look up in the corner, not all of them have them, but there are some that do. Well, there's a device and it picks up any type of unique sound. So if there's shootings in the area, that shooting can go back to the Houston Police Department and real-time analytics and say, hey, there's an incident going on, just for example, Nassau Bay, right? And so that is instantly sent to dispatch. Dispatch sends out a unit. And so that kind of alleviates and brings down, you know, a lot of the crimes that are happening that you see in your city. So like Dallas and LA currently have those devices installed. They also have those same devices also pick up traffic. So if you're commuting to work every day and you're commuting at a high traffic freeway, it'll let you know, and it can send it to your phone device, right? So your utility company can send you an app, you download it. And so if I'm leaving and I'm commuting to downtown from Seabrook, then I just look at my app and it'll send me data. Okay, your commute is 35 minutes. Oh, there's an accident. It just happened, you know, 2 minutes ago. You may want to take another route. We can use that same format and just shift it and make a framework where we collectively use different utilities, like I said, waste management, water, energy, and we can detect any type of upcoming storms. We could detect, hey, it could also give you some real-time information if there is a storm, if Houston is due for another storm, you know. We just had Harvey exactly 3 years to the date that Laura came, and our sisters and brothers in Louisiana has felt that impact for 3 years. And that information, if we had that device up on all of our pole systems, then it could have told us, yeah, we're due for another storm, and this storm could be roughly a category 4 or 5. And so we can take that information and help mitigate and prepare and plan. And a lot of our utility companies, petroleum companies, they are willing to invest in some of that type of innovative technologies because they're looking for innovative technologies. And so we can kind of bring them to the table as well, because they benefit from it as well, you know, on some of their issues of petroleum and natural gases. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
Well, that's the kind of leadership I'm looking for. Thank you for that, Kayla. I've got two and a half quick questions for Sri and Rashad, and then we're going to turn it over to Jon. The 2 questions for you, Sri. One's a simple yes or no. I hate to do that to you. But before I get to the yes or no question, I mean, you mentioned this, but you were a foreign service officer for many years. And I'm sure that you look at everything through a national security lens. Do you see Gulf Coast protection as a national security matter?
Sorry about that. Absolutely. And it's a national security matter, both in terms of the devastation it can do, but also in terms of the after effects. So, you know, if we did get to one of these black swan events, like you mentioned in the beginning, the number of chemicals that we have here within the greater Houston area, I mean, the kind of devastation that could be done is even greater than what we've ever seen before. I mean, there are potentials that are much, much more damaging than even some of the worst that will be seen in Harvey. And then secondly, I guess the other part about being a foreign service officer is that I see how people in other countries, how other governments react to different problems. And I don't think that we need to have such a myopic view that we don't use best practices from other places. So a good example is Holland, the Netherlands. They actually have technology there. They should be at much more risk than us for some of these great storms because of the sea level there, but they have invested in this kind of technology. I mentioned earlier canals and pumping, dynamic pumping. It would be expensive, but it would actually be a long-term investment. For example, if we had a canal that went all the way to the coast, that went under Fort Bend, for example. If you look on our flooding platform, we talk about a lot of different interventions, whether it's drainage improvement projects in Katy or on the Pitts Road detention pond, larger storm sewers and pumps in the Katy area, specifically around the Brazos River area, revising our floodplain maps, and then installing a system for coastal surge protection. Because that's the bottom line, is that we have to make these investments ahead of time. You can't deal with every storm as a one-off, because we know that they're not one-off situations. We see the pattern, and we have to both do something about the macroscopic problem, but also invest in the technology right now so that we're not investing in as much relief efforts afterwards, after every one of these floods. Because when you've got Barker and Adix overflowing, there's only two places that the water can go, and either direction it's bad, right? So we need to actually think about these problems for the long term, and we can't be so short-sighted about things, whether it's climate change and storms, whether it's a pandemic. These kind of things take long-term solutions, not short-term thinking.
Terrific. And then the yes or no question.
Yeah.
If you'll indulge me. Third reservoir or no?
I think a third reservoir is a potential good option. Like I said, I actually think that there's probably more potential options out there, some of which may require greater investment, but will be better for the long term. And so when we look at those technologies like that dynamic pumping system that I'm talking about, and digging a longer canal, it would be underground tunnels, underground canals that would go all the way to the coast. But I'm willing to look at all of those. I think third reservoir is a possibility, but some of that technology is still pretty old technology for the problems we're facing now, compared to the way they're handling these problems in other countries.
Yeah. Thank you. John, I'm gonna tee you up in 1 minute. I have a question for Rashad. Rashad, you said something that I want to come back to. Very important. You said that there's no relief in sight for the good people in your district because it hadn't been declared a disaster. Is that possible? Is your opponent doing anything to try to attract attention to this? Is there anything we can do to make phone calls to get some relief to you guys?
Well, right now, like you say, there is no relief. I know that Louisiana has been declared a disaster area. And if you know anything, Orange County was one of the biggest counties that was in my district that was hit by Hurricane Laura. But then you think about the other counties like mine, Jasper County, Newton County, which is right next to the border of Louisiana, that has still to this moment has no lights. So I believe if we continue to call, like you say, our representatives and keep pushing the issue that we need help, maybe it will be declared a disaster, and we will have someone like Red Cross or FEMA that come in, because so far right now, people like me and other small organizations are providing ice and water for people who don't have it at this current moment.
Well, I think your point of view and your appeal is going to produce some phone calls from this crowd to the right authorities to make sure that good things happen to you over there. Thank you, Rashad. All right, we have about 15 minutes left, 14 minutes left. And so if you have a question and you've not put it in the chat box, please do. While we're waiting for that last question to come in, I just want to say one thing. I've been campaigning, so to speak, with my friends in the Biden organization to say the magic words in Texas, which is that we have a water infrastructure problem. Parts of the state we have too much of it, parts of the state we don't have enough of it, and parts of the state in the middle we have just enough, but everybody's fighting over it. And we have a huge issue, and the two are not unrelated, because a big part of solving the problem with water in the state where we don't have enough is to have ways to communicate with parts of the state where we have too much. And so in our lifetime, water will be the issue. I think I read that when we had a drought 10 years ago, one of the problems is there wasn't enough fresh water to keep our refineries running. And so it's an economic issue. So, all right, John. So my friend Jon Powell, I keep thinking that you're a member of the Democratic Lawyers Association, and you have to keep reminding me that you're an engineer.
No, I'm not an engineer. I'm actually a scientist and had a business, environmental consulting, for quite some time. But I also have been involved in public service. I've been a councilman in my town. I am currently a councilman. I've been mayor of my town. And as many of you know, I ran for the position that Rashad is now running for back in 2018. That's where I met a lot of you. That's where I met Rashad and others. And you know, one of the reasons that I put this whole this panel together was to bring the whole issue of storm surge and flooding protection to the attention of our future elected officials. Right now, our current elected officials are, you know, in la-la land. They have no idea. It's not an issue for them. In District 36, Rashad, our guy is currently far more interested in building a wall with Mexico than he is in building a wall to keep the storm surge out. And, you know, if I look at what the serious issues are, excuse me, I'm much more concerned about the water than I am about migrants. So, you know, if we can get this to the attention of our elected officials, to me, that's very, very important. One of the things that Adrienne said, and that frankly everybody here has said, is that, you know, it's not just protecting a bunch of people and their fancy houses. It's protecting a huge portion of our U.S. economy. And that indeed has national security implications. You know, 30% of our U.S. refining is in the Galveston Bay area. You know, there are 4,200 above ground storage tanks, 4 billion gallons of hazardous substances. You know, we get a storm here. The U.S. Weather Service estimates on average a serious storm that could come up the Galveston Bay once every 15 years, a serious storm that'll glance it once every 7 years. So it's not if, it's when. And we all buy auto insurance. None of us are having automobile accidents every day, but it's one of the things that we do in case the worst happens. We've got it there. And we need our elected officials to start pushing this and say, this is important. So if we look at it, you know, the overall cost of this stuff, it is tiny compared to the damage that it can cause in terms of disrupted lives, in terms of people who, you know, get seriously injured or get killed, or in terms of the entire Bay Area that gets trashed by hazardous substances because tanks have been blown off their foundations. So just, you know, to play a little game here, the US is currently ordered roughly 2,400 F-35 fighter jets at the cost of $91 million per jet. That's, you know, roughly $218 billion. So in order to build the coastal spine, which is currently what's being, you know, set forth by the GLO, the Texas Land Office, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, you know, a bunch of other organizations, that's roughly $31 billion, or roughly 340, 350 F-35 jets. So as an elected official, I ask you this question: will the U.S. be as adequately protected from our foreign adversaries with only 2,100 new F-35s instead of 2,400 F-35s? And I think that we all kind of know the answer to that. So I'm hoping that, you know, those of you who get elected this time, hopefully all of you, you know, will be able to articulate this message about what's important to devote our resources. The other thing is just about everybody here has said the term invest. And that's where we're, you know, that's where the mindset I'm hoping of our elected officials needs to be. it's about investing in the future for our kids, for our grandkids, and the like. And so this term of, government spending, just it's not spending so much as, in this case, it is investment. Invest in the future. So please, let's see what we can do as elected officials in getting your colleagues in the various legislative bodies, in the administrative agencies that are going to deal with this stuff, to think about it in terms of investment in protection and real return that we're going to all recognize and receive, for what we ultimately invest here. So anyway, that's my piece. I was flooded during Ike. We had 1.5 foot of water in the house, so I've experienced it. It's not pleasant. And so anyway, if there are any questions, I don't see any in the chat room coming from the attendees. If they'd like to.
I've got a question. If no one else has asked, I've got a question.
Okay.
There's more than one approach to coastal storm protection. You hear different proposals. Some are environmentally friendly, some are not environmentally friendly. I am not an engineer. I insist on environmental friendly approaches. John, can you give us the state of play, or Susan, do you know the state of play in terms of the different possible approaches, and what are the pluses and minuses, and where do you think we're landing on this?
Yeah, just, very briefly, Mike, just about anything that humans do to the earth will have environmental consequences. And I do know that both the proposal for the, that's being put forth by the Corps of Engineers for the Texas Coastal Spine has environmental mitigation and remediation and investigation as part of it, as does the Galveston Bay Park proposal that's being done by the Speed Center out of Rice University. So environmental protection is going to be a part of whatever solution gets done. There are things like changes in the circulation patterns that are going to affect the fisheries and the oyster beds and all that sort of stuff. And as long as that's adequately evaluated and mitigated to the best possible way, we're always going to be ending up playing a balancing of environmental impact versus benefits gained.
Susan, I'm sure that folks in Galveston talk about this all the time.
They do. In fact, there's a debate about the plan that the Corps of Engineers have. They want to start, and you can't do this all like in one season. They want to start on Bolivar and the West End, and there's another group who want Galveston proper to be the first part of it. And there was a recent editorial in the Galveston Daily News about why that made sense. And I don't know all of the arguments that the Corps has for the way they want to do it, but and that makes sense to me. Of course, it's where I live. But I think maybe because I was protected by the seawall, maybe they thought that was enough. I don't know. Part of it is, start doing something. But I think there is environmental effect no matter what. This has been studied and studied and studied to death. It's time to. We can't just keep debating it for the rest of our lifetimes. We have to at some point do it.
And the beauty of the two proposals that are out there, the Galveston Bay Park and the Coastal Spine, is that they're compatible with one another. The park protection that would be primarily the west side of Galveston Bay and the Houston Ship Channel and industrial areas is something that can be put in a period of a few years, with the Coastal Spine taking maybe as much as 20 years. So, let's start with what we can do to, achieve some sort of protection, and then move on at some point and, do what, do a more complete job and make sure that the, portions of East Texas through Orange County and through Beaumont, Port Arthur area are protected as well.
Well, I personally, I love our coast. I spent a lot of time on it. every chance I get. I know where all of the places to sit and read a book, which beaches are available to you, depending on where you're campaigning, depending on where your car breaks down. I can find a place to sit and read a book anywhere. And I know that I'm not alone. I know that Texans, you don't have to live here. Texans love our coast, and we've got to take great care of it. So we're almost out of time. 3 minutes that remain. Stephen Dubel shows up when the time has elapsed.
Actually,
I don't think we have any unanswered questions unless you're aware of one, Stephen.
Yeah, there's one that I got from Harry that apparently our chat feature's down or he couldn't access it. But he wants to know if there's any litigation in the United States to force investment in infrastructure to address these issues. And if so, what's the status of it and what's going on with it? Does anybody know?
I don't know. I don't know.
I wonder if there is some impact litigation and maybe there's some lawyers out there that can be creative and come up with it on those issues.
Yeah, great question. Not a bad idea. You know, my proposed solution is just to elect the right politicians.
Right.
I mean, there was a time when I think of the word progressive, you know, we hear that word a lot. When I think of the word progressive, we made a lot of progress when we built 7,000 dams after we had terrible flooding a long time ago. We've made progress on so many different things in the old days, but something has come over, not our party, but the other party, where we don't address these issues head on, and it's just a bad answer. So we have to elect, people that you see on the screen.
Yeah. The other thing, Mike, is that this should appeal to both sides of the aisle. Fiscal conservatives should see this as, you know, a true, you know, conservative issue where we're not, you know, where the return is going to be much greater than the amount invested. So, you know, I don't understand what the resistance is.
I agree.
All right.
Well,
Mike,
Stephen, I think my clock shows that it's straight up 1 o'clock.
Yeah, if there's any other questions, feel free to address them. But otherwise, I'd like to really thank the panel. We got a great group of candidates here, and let's all get behind them and support them so we can address these issues.
Yes, please do. Let's get behind these candidates, support them, and you know, their websites are available. Please go and visit them and do whatever we can to make sure that the people you're looking at are our next elected representatives.
Okay, and unless Mike has anything else, I just have a couple of announcements. All right, the October 3rd CLE that I couldn't remember earlier is on election law, and I put some info up on the chat. It'll be up on our Facebook soon. It'll be a 2-hour free CLE, and it's really geared towards people who are volunteering to work as poll workers. And we have a lot of law students signing up and a lot of lawyers signing up in that effort, and we really need more. We need an army. We have, I think, 100 in Harris County signed up. We need 2 or 3 times more than that. And there's a very aggressive state effort going on, and you'll see information at the Texas Democratic Lawyers Association. And we have some people from all over the state joining us today and have been joining us. And you can contact Rose Clouston with the party to volunteer in that effort, and we'll be posting information on it. So with that, thank you all, and we will see you in a couple days with a great interview by Barbara Radnowski with John Dean on American authoritarianism, and another reason to get behind all these candidates to put a stop to that or curb it. I think we have a couple things in the chat room, but I can't tell if they're questions. No, they don't seem to be. All right, Mike, anything else?
No, that's it here. Other than say thank you. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you, Mike, for moderating. Thanks, John, for putting together a great panel. And thanks to all you candidates for participating. Good luck.
Thank you for having us.
Yep.
Good luck, gang.
Bye.
Thank you.